So in order to prepare for Slichot, or not Slichot, for the high holy days, I've been thinking a lot about personal responsibility, and this idea that so much of what we pray about on the holidays and what we do teshuva for on the high holy days are interpersonal or intrapersonal relationships. You know, we say our actions between us and God, the day of forgiveness forgives, but for actions between one human to another, we have to really take on that responsibility for ourselves. And yet so much of what it means to be responsible to another human being is difficult to know. How far do we go to take responsibility for someone else? And how good do we have to be about it is kind of the question that I'm coming with today. So I thought that we would start by going around kind of introducing ourselves, who we are, maybe what congregation we're from, or what brought us here this morning. But really, to answer the question, when you hear the word responsible, what comes to mind? And if you have a story or a person or a short anecdote that really illustrates the idea of responsibility to you, to share that. So I think the best way to do this over Zoom is for everyone, and I see almost everyone, I think, except for Marilyn, is muted right now. Marilyn, I can mute you if you have trouble doing it, or because you're unmuted, I could invite you to go first.
I don't have too much to say about it right off, but I would say that my main thing about responsibility is deciding when I'm being too responsible. In other words, when I'm stepping too much into somebody else's private space and taking on more. And so just keeping my responsibility kind of to myself, it's in that mix that I find it a little difficult.
I think you already bring up a great challenge, and almost exactly what our poem is going to be about is sort of how much is too much? How much of ourselves do we have to put on the line? And like you said, how much is too much because we can't take on that burden? We can't emotionally handle it. Or as you mentioned, how much is too much because you're invading someone else's privacy or their freedom of decision or action? So thanks for starting us off. I'm gonna mute you now, but feel free to. I think the best way to kind of go through the muting and unmuting is just, if you have something to say, to unmute yourself and say it.
Yeah. Oh, that's fine. And I'll just listen. I'm happy. Okay.
No, we want. Trust me, this is going to be a conversation. It's not going to be me teaching, preaching, or whatever. Thanks. All right. So Judy, I'm going to invite you to go next. You're next on my list. So now you got to hold on. You got to.
I'm unmuted now, right?
Great. Yeah.
So when I hear about responsibility, it was the opposite of what my good friend Marilyn said. I actually feel a lot of responsibility to speak up for those who can't speak up for themselves. So I think I've spent most of my life trying to do that, not to get into their business, but to help people help themselves and get what they need to be the best they can be.
Beautiful. I love that you added someone who isn't in the position to do it for themselves, and to help others reach that potential. Do you have an anecdote or a person or something that kind of helps illustrate this?
I'm thinking a lot about going to the border. I'm planning to go to the border in Texas the third week of October, because I feel so strongly that those of us who can speak Spanish and can tell people their rights need to be there to help them. So that's an example. I'm looking
That's
for.
awesome. Thank you. All right, Lisa.
So I'm Lisa Rogers. I'm a member of Etz Chaim in Palo Alto, and I live in Mountain View. I recently left a job where I was responsible for 6 other people, as their manager, in an environment where I couldn't really do what I wanted to do to help them succeed in their careers. So I'm a little shy about responsibility right now, at least in a professional sense, and trying to think through how much I want to take on and how much I want to commit to going forward.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. And you bring up another definition of responsibility. Sometimes, especially in a work environment, sometimes, being in the manager position, being in the higher level position means you take ultimate responsibility for other people's success and failure. And so that idea that we are connected in our actions because we're responsible for each other, or ultimately someone has to take responsibility, can be really complicated. Well, thanks for sharing where you are. Monica.
So my favorite definition of responsibility, and I just found it, it's pretty long, but the heart of, and it's from Landmark Education, and the heart of the concept is that responsibility begins with the willingness to be cause in the matter of one's life. And ultimately, it's a context from which one chooses to live. And I think I'll just read it. It's 4 or 5 sentences, but I think you guys will enjoy it.
Yeah, go for it.
So it's responsibility starts with the willingness to be cause in the matter, whether experienced at the time or not, and ends up being cause in the matter. Ultimately, it's a context from which one chooses to live. Responsibility is not burden, fault, praise, blame, credit, shame, or guilt. Responsibility is not, I'm responsible for my part, or I have to get to where I can be responsible for it. In responsibility, there's no evaluation of good or bad, right or wrong. There's simply what's so and your stand. Being responsible is dealing with the situation from the view of life that you are the generator of what you do, what you have, and who you are. This is not the truth. It's a place to come from. No one can make you responsible, nor can you impose responsibility on another. It's a grace you give yourself, an empowering context that leaves you with a say in the matter of life.
Wow. Thank you, first of all, for coming so prepared with that. There's so much that definition is going to add to our conversation. But what I particularly jotted down from that is this idea that responsibility comes from kind of dealing with the situation that is put in front of you. And we don't always know how we're going to rise to the occasion when it comes to making the choice to become responsible for others. There are some situations that like Judy, you mentioned, I'm preparing myself to go and take responsibility for this moral conundrum in our country, and I want to have a voice. And then Monica, I think what your definition helped also show us is, and sometimes we're just We just need to rise to the occasion in front of us. And when we do that, it can tell us who we are and what we're really about. Anything you want to add?
No, thank you for letting me share that. And by the way, I was not prepared. Literally, when you said share your definition, I was like, oh, you know what? And I just ran and found it. So
That's amazing. Well, thanks for bringing that to us.
Absolutely. No, thank you for the conversation.
So I don't usually, I'm not usually called to poetry as my text to kind of help us explore these big questions. My colleague Rabbi Laura is much better, more familiar with poetry than I am. But I actually encountered this the poem that I'd like to share about this theme of responsibility through an initiative of the URJ, the Union for Reform Judaism, called Ask Big Questions. And it's the goal of their initiative is to help people from all different backgrounds just kind of get together and have conversations that are about deep questions, such as, what does it mean to take responsibility? So we're gonna together, I'm gonna share a text with you guys that is a poem. And if someone wants to read it aloud, it's a couple paragraphs long. And this poem is going to tell a story about a situation in which someone could or couldn't have or may not have taken responsibility. And I kind of look forward to dissecting it together with you based on the definitions that you all shared of what does it mean to be responsible. And then by asking and reflecting for ourselves, what might we have wanted to do in this situation? And does it change our understanding of what does it mean to be responsible for others? Does that sound good? All right, I'm going to now share this screen. So it's gonna look a little different. All right. Can everyone see this text?
Yes.
Yeah. Great. All right. So does someone, if someone wants to volunteer to read this poem called Okay by Lowell Yeager, just unmute yourself and start reading, please, for us.
We can only see the top half of it though, so maybe you could scroll up so that the first line of the poem is the first thing on your screen.
Sure, and I'll keep scrolling down. You can see it when I scroll?
Yeah, we can.
Yes.
Okay, great. Does someone want to read?
I'll read.
Thanks, Lisa.
There's a man in the road waving. We're driving home from Hot Springs, my wife and I, and our 3 kids. He's holding something bundled in his arms. Don't stop, my wife telegraphs to me with a sideways glance. I'm okay with that. It's a dog, the kids shout. He's carrying a dog. So okay, I stop, roll down the window. Please help, the man says, tears leaking down his stubbled chin. The dog is bleeding. He's rolled up in an old rug, eyes open, miserable. I just ran over my dog, the man blubbers. He's drunk, and he stinks. Okay, I'm thinking. I'm stuck with this. The kids squeeze together, the man and dog huff and groan, sniffle and slide themselves into our lives. My kids' faces in the rear view are pinched, afraid to breathe. Wet dog, blood, booze, rotting socks. The man whimpers, cradles his dog. I'm effing sorry, man, so effing sorry. This is less than okay. We spit gravel behind us and speed back to Hot Springs to find a vet. It's a Sunday, my wife whispers. Everything's locked up. I'm thinking, okay, what now? At the one payphone on Main, I pull over to let the man and dog out. You better call someone, I say. My voice sounds afraid. The man's eyes are shut, not asleep, but almost. The dog's eyes are shut too. You better call someone, I say louder. Okay? Okay? The man stands at the payphone, his dog bundled on the sidewalk. He just stands there. My kids cry silently. My wife trusts me to be the man she hopes I am. I don't know what's okay and what's not. The man is fumbling in his empty pockets for change. I feel a lot like that.
And that's the end of the poem. Thanks for reading.
Wow.
So we're gonna, because it's actually a lot smaller than I think, I'm comfortable with you guys unmuting yourselves unless you have a lot of background noise, so that it's easy to chime in and out, but whatever feels comfortable to you. So I just wanted to start with getting someone's kind of summary of the situation in the poem and to see if there's anything that's not clear. And if it would be helpful to read it again, of course we can. Would someone just kind of describe the situation?
Okay, I think it's pretty clear, actually. But if you go back up to the top, it would help. The family is driving on a Sunday together. The man's driving, and they see a scruffy man standing at the side of the road with something in his arms. The kids see that it's a dog and it's bleeding. And so his first tendency is not to stop. When he sees a dog, then he stops. But then they notice that the man's drunk, and he says he ran over his own dog. And then he has to let him in once he stops. So he goes back to town, takes him back to town, but it's a Sunday and there aren't any vets open. And so he thinks he's doing something nice and drops him next to a payphone. Obviously, that's not the current day with cell phones. And the man still isn't able to help him because he doesn't have money in his pocket. So, just like he doesn't have money in his pocket, the speaker does not know what else he could do. He's out of change too.
Perfect. Is there anyone that wants to kind of add anything that they noticed about the poem or any of the other details? I'll go back to the top, and if you want me to move it down, just let me know.
Well, go ahead.
Well, there's this sort of dynamic where, these people are in the car and they're kind of isolated from the rest of the world, and then they let in this guy, and he's smelly and he's drunk and he's swearing in front of the children, and obviously not the kind of person that you would want to let in your car. And then he ran over his own dog. Pretty much the opposite of somebody that you would want to be engaged with. And yet, because they stopped there, they have some responsibility to help.
Yeah, right. I think we can wonder if some of our own biases or judgments about who this man is make us question whether or not someone is worthy of our help. Do we need to take responsibility for someone if maybe they're not taking responsibility for themselves because they are behaving erratically, because they're not, because they're drinking, because they've made a big mistake? It definitely raises some questions.
So, Lisa?
Yeah.
So this is what I was referring to when I first commented.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that in the city, this question of this whole problem comes up constantly because of the homeless problem. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
And walking with my daughter near where she lives, there are people sprawled. You can't actually tell whether they're alive or not. And I said to my daughter, do you call somebody each time you see someone like this? And she said, no. But I'm like, it's very difficult not, she said, maybe this is where they want to end for the night. Anyway, I think it's a real problem that we face all the time.
Look, I think bringing a situation that maybe we similarly face when we encounter people who look like they need help. They look like they could use someone taking responsibility for them. In the definition that Judy gave, giving voice to people that might not be able to advocate or take responsibility for themselves. And yet there's another layer when we see someone who making choices that might not feel like they're taking responsibility for themselves first. And Marilyn, right, as you said, how much do we need to put ourselves out there? How much effort do we need to make for every individual that we encounter that looks like they need help? And I don't necessarily have an answer to your question of what do we do about encountering homeless people in San Francisco. I don't necessarily have an answer of what should have happened in this story, but I think it gives us a lot of food for thought. What is the situation for all of the characters in the story at the end of the poem? Where is everyone kind of left?
Well, you know what's interesting, just to actually go back, is if you look at where everyone started in, the beginning, middle, and end, I was struck by, there's a man and my wife says, don't stop. And
Right.
I'm okay with that, right? So I think from the beginning, he was like, shoot, what do I do? And was relieved when his wife said, don't stop.
Yeah, and even more, can I just even point out even more that the wife doesn't seem to say it out loud. The wife telegraphs to me with a sideways glance, like they're kind of silently communicating, like, you don't need to do this. This is not your responsibility. And I love, like, right, you notice that relief. Yes, we're on the same page. This is not a man that we need to take responsibility for.
And then the kids say, it's a dog. He's carrying a dog. Now, the kids didn't say stop. So what I'm fascinated by is kind of looking at it from the place of the man and how I feel like in his heart, immediately he wanted to stop. He saw the glance from his wife and he's like, okay, I'm okay with that. But I think he was not, that's why I love the name of it as okay.
Okay, right.
And it's not okay. So then the kids didn't say stop. But the second the kids said it's a dog, he's carrying a dog, he stops.
Yeah. So I love that you noticed, right, that no one ever asks him to stop or don't stop.
Yeah.
So we don't really know, you sort of said maybe you kind of interpreted it as maybe he wanted to stop at the beginning, but it was the wife that kind of deterred him and the kids kind of encouraged him. But you're right that no one explicitly is giving him any order or direction of stop or don't stop.
Well, and he's not, like, in the world of responsibility, he's not taking responsibility for his act. Like, he's kind of going with the wind in terms of his wife, his kid, like, there's, and not the wind. Like, I think he has this sense of responsibility for another human that he's torn about acting upon is not clear, and there's no clear answers, right? But I find it, before, and we'll go back to the end too, but before we go to where people are at the end, I was just very struck by the process that got them to stop. Do you know what I mean?
No, I think it really is fascinating. I love that that you really kind of point out, like, no one is making the decision here. And I can push even further, like, who does the man have ultimate responsibility for? Is it the man in the road? Is it the dog? Or is it his wife and his 3 kids? Does your responsibility change depending on who you are and where you are in life?
And the context in which you're in, you don't want to maybe put your kids at risk, right? Or, but that's also what I find fascinating. Like, to me, this man, I think, feels responsibility for humanity. And that is what is guiding him. And if you go back to the end, that powerful line of the man is fumbling in his empty pockets for change. I feel a lot like that, where there's fumbling and you're reaching for something, but there may not be anything there, and you want something and you're fumbling, and that's anyway, that's what I'm left with, is that he wants to be responsible for humanity, for his kids, his wife, the man on the street, the dog, humanity and dog kind, I don't know, but there's not a clear direction. So anyway, that's what I'm taking away.
No, I think I'm just going to go back to the top just to stick with where we are. That's certainly one reading. I'm not sure that I personally agree, but I think part of this is that there is no one way to read it. Anyone else have want to respond to Monica's reading? Or
Well, there's this tension of what to do, right? Like, so far throughout the whole poem, the guy's been trying to help, but he hasn't really done anything, and at the end he still hasn't really done anything that helps. So he has a good intention, but it's not effective.
Yeah, so interesting. So when we think of where is everyone at the end of the poem, and I'll scroll down to the end, kind of like Monica, you said, we're all just fumbling. We haven't made any actions. Like, my kids are crying. My wife trusts me to be the man she hopes I am. We're going to come back to that line. I don't know what's okay and what's not. The man and his dog are on the sidewalk. Like, no one in this situation seems to be any better than when they were the happy family driving home from Hot Springs. And that's a tough place to end when, as Monica, you were saying, it seems like he had pretty good intentions. It seems like he's someone that wants to help out, and yet everything just fumbled apart.
Okay, so I waited till everybody else had a chance to speak, but I think this really tests what responsibility means. because yes, he wanted to help. Yes, he wanted to do what would make his family okay. And he felt sorry when his kids noticed it was a dog and they really cared about him stopping. But he didn't make a plan, and he didn't stick through it until the end. So, he was still looking for a way he could drop the man by a place he could call instead of stopping with him. Clearly, he wasn't very able to do it on his own. This is where you help people who can't help themselves, and help him find a vet. He didn't want to go that far. At least he hadn't gone that far. And he didn't know what else to do when the man was fumbling for change. And I think he was really torn. He knew that if he gave him money, he might have to help him call. He might have to stay longer, and he really wasn't up for that because he wasn't ready to take responsibility in the long term. He was trying to help quickly.
So do you think that he had a responsibility to do more than what he did?
Well, he didn't really help. So if he decided he was going to be in, I think he has to be in to actually try to help.
So if you're going to make the choice to stop, you sort of have to be prepared. And Monica, I think that went back to the definition that you had shared that I loved so much of, like, you're stuck with the situation that's in front of you. You don't have the opportunity to say, I'm going to take a certain amount of responsibility. You kind of have to be able to follow through to maybe what that could lead to. Are you prepared to go to actually solve a problem? Oh.
Well, is there a correlation between responsibility and outcomes? Or is responsibility about the action that you're taking now and now and now and now?
I think it's a great question. I think this poem raises that question. You could argue this man didn't really do all that much. He kind of half-assed the responsibility. He wasn't sure whether or not to stop, and then he didn't really want to go back to the vet, and then he left him on the payphone. It's like all of these kind of things that he was maybe playing the role, but not actually, as Judy kind of said, like stepping up and taking real action, taking real responsibility. And yet often we have to speak out, right? If we believed that responsibility was only correlated to a positive outcome, well, why would we do anything to help anyone? The problems that, again, thinking of, like, as Judy's talking about, our immigration challenge or our refugee challenge or our global warming, environmental challenge, like these are things that we could argue are never going to be solved no matter how hard we try ultimately. So why do anything at all?
Yeah, I mean, to me, there's a correlation between what is responsibility for me, responsibility for you, and you, and you, and you. Like, how we may have each dealt with that situation or similar situations that we encounter will likely be different. And I think the heart of it is being cause in the mat, that you're out to do something based on your personal compass, like what responsibility, the things I will act on based on, my values will be different than what you will act on based on your values. And I think that responsibility is maybe acting on the values that are important for you, and I think the thing that's missing is the being cause in the matter. Like, he was never cause in the matter of anything. It was more, I'll do this. Oh yeah, no. Yeah, well, but there wasn't clear. So I think that maybe it's, if you're causing the matter, regardless of what the outcome is, right? Because I think that he would have, if it was a Saturday and the vet was open, he would have brought him to the vet. And it probably would have, went happily ever after, like the same actions. But it was a Sunday.
I love that you kind of implied like our personal values drive the choices that we make. I think potentially just as good of a poem, not just as good of a poem, but just as good of a story is a man's in the road. We're driving home from Hot Springs, my wife and our 3 kids. I know my responsibility is keeping our family safe, so I keep driving home. The end. Right?
Yeah.
Like really, and that would not necessarily be a situation where this guy is not taking responsibility. It's that his values
because he's
are
being causing the matter and taking a stand for something. Like he didn't take a stand for anything. And maybe that's what leaves us fumbling.
I love that. So one of the things that we need to do is really articulate like, what are our values, and then how can we act in ways that display those values so that when we're caught in the situation in front of us, we can weigh the options.
Yes, but life doesn't make it that easy for us because we're always presented with situations where we're unprepared, and we don't know the outcome. So, it's just not that easy. And I think that you're right, that in a way, deciding not to put the guy in the car could be a responsible and more prudent act, and you don't know. And maybe, but also I was thinking that maybe he stopped because when his kids got involved, he wanted to act like a person that would stop and not be afraid.
Beautiful. Let's go back down to that line at the very end of the poem. Can you see it right here? My wife trusts me to be the man she hopes I am.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean to you guys?
To make the decisions that are right.
Right. My wife expects.
She's leaving it up to me to make the right decisions. She trusts that I'm going to do it.
Yeah, I mean, he's a role model for his children, and someone that he wants his wife's respect, and he's not sure what to do. I think that that's probably why he stopped in the first place, and he doesn't know how to follow through.
And that there's more pressure on us when we know that other people are at stake. And Lisa, I think going back to your example of being a manager at work, being responsible for a team, being a little bit in the spotlight of having to make the right or wrong decisions, or that there's this extra pressure. I wonder if there's also some extra pressure here of his definition of masculinity. He's kind of letting his wife and kids dictate his choices, and yet we might say, well, the definition of a father or, the man is to be the one that knows what to do. And I think that this poem also, like, pretty subversively challenges that too.
Yep.
So, no judgment, but what do you think you would have done if you were the one driving the car? How would you have weighed what's important? if you were putting yourself in a similar situation, and you can only imagine, or you can't know, because as Marilyn said, life isn't that easy. It's not going to throw you a clear cut yes or no, here's what to do. Maybe you've been in a similar situation. I know.
Okay.
Judy, please.
Yeah, I'll say something. I actually don't, if I were driving with my family, with children, I don't know that I would stop. I think I would if I had a cell phone, or in the old days with to go to the closest phone and call the police or the animal. If I had seen what he saw that it was a dog, the animal SPCA or whatever, and call and tell them exactly where it was and to go immediately and help. I think that would be a way out of putting one's family at risk and doing some real help.
Right, putting limits on your responsibility to stop and say, here's what I can do for you. I can call, like trying to be clear, I can call these people that can offer you help, but I can't put you in my car. I can't take you into town. I can't take the bleeding dog, but I will
Get you help that you need.
Right. And I think that again, that's weighing this idea of like, how much do we really have to put ourselves out on a limb to help others? It's a really tough question.
So I'd like to comment about a slightly different point, and then I'm going to have to leave the group. And that's just that what this reminds me is that when you do make your decision, whatever decision you make, that this is your response, the responsible part is not to stop then, but to follow through on your decision. So that goes back to that earlier reading. And just don't get lost along the way once you've decided.
You be cause in the matter of what you believe or where your stand.
Yes, I think that for myself, sometimes I start and then I don't follow all the way through. And that's a good reminder for me that once I have made my decision, that to follow through. In other words, if Judy would go and then say, oh, I'm running late, I'm not going to make that call, that would be the bad part.
Right. No, I think that you guys are both kind of balancing, you're saying, I want to be able to follow through the responsibility that I am willing to take. And then Judy, I think what I loved what you kind of said is, but I'm going to come with a defined boundary of how much I'm willing to do, so that when you've reached the end of your responsibility, when you've followed through. Like, right, if you stopped and then didn't make the phone call, you wouldn't be following through. But if you said, here's what I can offer, and then you do it, you're kind of released from the responsibility, because according to your own boundary, according to your own definition, you've done it. These are, again, like really, really tough, even situations to imagine. But I appreciate you joining us, Marilyn. And if you have to go, I understand. So I'll see you at the
Thanks
hotel.
so much.
All right.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
I want to throw in something though. I was in a class the other day where we were studying Pirkei Avot, and there's that famous line, and I forget who said it, but it says it's something like, "You are not responsible to complete the work, but neither are you free to desist from it."
Right.
So to me, that says something about you have to try, even if you're not really sure that you're going to be able to finish it. I mean, none of us is going to be able on our own to fix the climate or the border crisis or, any of the really, really big problems in our world. But that doesn't mean that we get a pass on trying to do something.
Exactly. I mean, I think that goes back to this question of if we made the decision only based on outcome, only based on how much we can help, then that's actually not the right. I think we kind of all agreed on that's not the right measure to decide whether or not we should stop the car. Kind of offering what you can, and then protecting yourself, protecting your family, protecting your personal boundaries are important as well. Going back to that very famous teaching, you can't solve everything on your own. Lisa, did you have a sense for yourself, if you were in this situation, what you might feel or do?
I am actually in a situation rather like this. I know a person who was evicted from her home, and I volunteered to help her move out and to store some of her things in my house while she was looking for another place to live. And it's been a while, and she hasn't found another place to live. And I'm really grappling with the situation of, should I try to do more? Well, how much more should I try to do? I'm very much where the guy is at the end, fumbling in the pockets. So I think, if it were me, I would keep trying to figure out some other thing to do. Maybe we don't have to get into the practicalities of, the guy on the street in Hot Springs. But, maybe there's something else that you can do. And the situation is fluid. Maybe you give them the money for a phone call. You can call information and ask for, a 24-hour vet, or maybe there's more that you can do. And even though you're fumbling around, you got to kind of keep fumbling, and perhaps a solution or a partial solution will appear.
I think that's really powerful. And I appreciate you sharing that, your personal situation as well, because, right, like your immediate instinct wasn't, oh, I have to let this friend live with me, right? Like there's that you can do what you can within your, right, like within your boundaries and within your, your personal ability. And it's important to keep those personal boundaries for tons of reasons. And yet just kind of saying, well, it's not my life, it's not my problem, doesn't feel like we're living to the best of who we can be. Monica, did you have a?
Well, again, you can never, who knows what would really happen. But if I speculate, I think it would start with, I would discuss it with my family, right? So if I was the one driving, or, my husband or whom, I would be, okay, you guys, should we stop? What do you think we should do? And have a conversation to at least, and then great. Okay, let's stop. Let's find out what's happening. I have a feeling that everyone would be, yeah, let's stop and, roll down the window and find out what's happening. And we have some friends who are volunteer at this Rocket Dog. And I think what we would do is probably call them up and say, here's the situation. And they have resources 24 hours a day, because you find hurt dogs and lost dogs all the time. And, I think we would have probably gone down that path of, trying to help through this organization that we happen to know about. But I think it would be that's what I think. And again, where I continue to be left with out of this conversation, because, responsibility, I'd be very curious to know what the definition, like the real definition in the dictionary is of responsibility. Not that necessarily, like we're kind of looking at what does responsibility mean for ourselves and in relationship to other people. But the idea of choosing what is right for you and following through is what I'm kind of left with in this conversation. I mean, and again, it's never simple. I don't know that any of it's ever a formula, but that feels right for me in this moment.
Yeah, I love that, like, right, you can only hypothesize about a specific situation, but leaving with this idea that if we choose to take responsibility, we really have to understand what values are we putting first, what choice is right for us, and how much are we willing to do, how much can we follow through, and then make the commitment to follow through. I know personally, I was thinking of many situations where I'm driving by myself, commuting to work, and you see a car pulled over on the side of the road, and someone, standing outside of their car looking like they need some kind of roadside assistance, and definitely not stopping. And I'm not saying that I'm making a good choice or a bad choice, but when I reflect on, well, why wouldn't I stop in that situation? I think the value that I'm putting first is my own safety. That I don't know a stranger on the side of the road, and would the situation be different if I was with my husband? Probably. Would the situation be different if I was with friends? Maybe. But just thinking of how hard it really is to help a stranger, because we open up a can of worms. We open up responsibility that we might not know how to fully take on upon ourselves. And yet at the same time, there are things we've talked about, right? Making a phone call, referring to an animal rescue program, helping to store someone's stuff when they're in a hard time. We certainly know all of the ways we try to do our best to take on responsibility and to help bigger challenges because we care. So the last question, we're almost out of time, but the last question that I wanted to leave you with as we kind of prepare to begin Rosh HaShana is how do our Jewish values influence our idea of responsibility? And we kind of got onto that a little bit, Lisa, with you bringing in the Pirkei Avot quote, and I think just the idea that how do we define the values that are important to us, I think often comes from our Jewish tradition, that we don't have to make these decisions in a vacuum of what's important, because we do have Jewish tradition guiding us, helping us decide what's important, and how much we're able to do. But I hope that I'm gonna close the screen. Does anyone have any final closing comments?
Well, I just wanted to, I gotta hop off and hop onto another call, but thank you and Lashana Tova.
Thanks, Monica. Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
Yes, thank you. Good food for thought.
Thank you. Yeah. So I hope that this just kind of helps us as we go into the new year, really think about our responsibility towards others, towards ourselves, towards the world.
Yes.
All right. Shana Tova.